All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really excited to kick off this first panel conversation today. It's going to be really thrilling. I've been doing a lot of talks on AI and ML recently, and each one of them I learn new things, and it's an amazing conversation piece right now. So I'm excited to start with this. I want to introduce our panelists. We brought together a pretty diverse group of panelists on the topic. So instead of just getting a couple technologists on here, we've really mixed it up. So on the far side, we have Iverson Bell. He's a technical program manager for Cubic. To his right, we have Pamela Fasolo. She's a senior digital sales strategist for Enradius. So she's in marketing, and Iverson is in technology. To his right, we have Jason Michael Perry. He is the CTO of Mindgrub, another technologist. And to his right, we have Miutescu, and he is a partner at Whitford, Taylor & Preston, so an attorney. So you can see we have a mixed panel because we want to talk about the legality, we want to talk about marketing, we want to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI and ML. All right, so I've got a series of questions, and then we'll also kind of riff a little bit too. So the first question, I'm going to go down the line here, is for each of our panelists to describe how you are currently using AI within your organizations. And for each of you, I want you to listen to these case studies, because everyone's heard about ChatGPT, but AI has been around for years. It's just that ChatGPT brought it into the light now, and we're all hyper aware that AI exists, but you're going to be amazed at all the different use cases. So Raz, if you could start off and talk about how at Whitford Taylor Preston you guys are using AI or working with AI, or your customers are using AI that you guys have to, defend.
Sure. Todd, thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. It's a pleasure. We're a law firm. We're not exactly known to be an industry that is technology forward, maybe because of the historical tendency to be a bit more conservative in terms of technology adoption because of the risks and all the nature of our practice. But AI is, there are kind of two ways for us to deal with AI. One is obviously with our clients, and we have to deal with our clients' AI issues whenever those come up. Occasionally we have to demo products and try to kind of understand those. Operationally, on the administrative side, AI is really nothing that new, and maybe over the past decade or so, AI has been kind of hidden in the electronic discovery process. AI tools have been used extensively by litigators, primarily to discover materials, to read large amounts of data, to pull data elements from massive data dumps by using some kind of predictive algorithm to figure out if something is or is not relevant to whatever the matter is at hand. And now so this has kind of been traditional. We use AI, we don't really think of it as AI, and then maybe we can at some point get in the discussion of what is AI. We use AI in the context of contract review. So oftentimes, if we need the proverbial second set of eyes, we'll use a tool that's embedded or maybe added on to a solution that we use for document review to basically check our contracts and point out inconsistencies, errors, whatever the algorithm perceives that would deserve further attention. And those tools are kind of good. They're not perfect, but we use them to assist us as almost like a co-counsel. And I don't want to market any companies out there, but that's basically how we use AI. In terms of the ChatGPT situation, the fact that's in vogue, and this fear of missing out that we all have nowadays, we're also looking at how can we use this for content generation. What are the risks of using content generation? How far can we use AI? How little can we use it? And then maybe we'll address some of these issues. We run into issues of, can we trust this thing? And what are the ethical implications of using AI given that to some extent we don't really know what decisions the algorithms make because we don't really understand the algorithms. So.
Great, yeah, there's a lot of things that we'll be able to circle back on there. I think at one point you said co-counsel with AI, which if you meant to say it or not, I think that's kind of a brilliant thought, because I know Jason is the CTO of Mindgrub, and I know we've been doing pair programming with AI, and I mentioned earlier the manufacturing industry is now doing cobotics, which is humans paired with robotics. And I see AI as being very complementary until it replaces us finally. And I know there was probably law.com, now there's law.ai that'll actually write legal text for you. But Jason, how's Mindgrub using AI, aside from pair programming with it?
Yeah, so I also want to say that AI has been here for years. This is something that is not necessarily new, it's more about the accessibility that we're seeing now. Before this, I think the regular day-to-day person just didn't understand how far technology had come, and ChatGPT has been that opportunity to really have that level of accessibility that was just not there before. At Mindgrub, we like to make sure that we eat our own dog food. It's just the best way to say it. So we're of course doing pair programming using products like GitHub's Copilot. We're pairing our developers with this type of technology and software to try and accelerate the speed that they do development. And that's been hugely beneficial. But also, we're experimenting with developing generative content, using AI tools like Jasper and things like that to create blog posts, create content. But we're also building products for our clients, and we've done this for years. Recommendation engines, personalization systems, matching software that tries to pair people together. These are all things with deep algorithms that we've been writing and building, and now we're just taking it to the next step by pulling in some of these tools like OpenAI and some of AWS's many different services to just make it even more powerful and tap into it. Right now, we have a lot of different experiments that we're running with clients as well as with our own internal teams to see how we can push our work forward so we can take those ideas, those concepts, bring them back to our clients and help improve their business processes, their workflows. So it's that combination of our own interests as an innovation consultancy and R&D, pulling that in and then figuring out how can we take that and make all of you all even more successful, make sure that your businesses can be more profitable, right? What does it look like to increase conversions by making sure that content really reaches the users that you're looking for? What does it mean if we can have that cobiotics process of really aligning our engineers or your whatever day-to-day office workers and knowledge workers and providing them with things that accelerate them and make them move faster? And that's what we're looking to do. That's what we're trying to, Todd always talks about the singularity, and that's really ultimately where we want to get to that point where with that robotic assistance that we can all move faster and quicker. I posted something about this on LinkedIn, but I don't know, it was maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago. There was a great post about humans need not exist. It's a video, and I suggest that you all watch it, and it really just talks about the length of how far we've come to the point that music, it's being generated right now with AI. There's so many things that you may not realize that AI is behind the scenes doing today that we take for granted, and this is just going to accelerate. Like I said, accessibility is what this is really about right now. There are ideas that I would never have thought of as a developer and as an engineer that I'm seeing suddenly folks who have access to tools like ChatGPT take to another level, and that's what we're trying to see how we can help and push all of our clients and everyone in here forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. Definitely there's a lot of technical aspects of AI, but I think what we've seen in this past year is the explosion in generative content, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Jasper, whether it's copy.ai. There's a number of tools as well as imagery tools. But Pam, with Enradius, I know you're in marketing and business development. How are you using AI?
So I'm more on the machine learning side. Within Enradius, we work on managing advertising campaigns for our clients. And so what we're doing is we're placing ad campaigns and we're using machine learning algorithms to improve the response of campaigns. And some of these things aren't new, right? So we've always been able to track conversions, but we're really looking at the larger picture and really taking it to the next level, where I'm not just looking at who's filling out the forms and looking at number of conversions of people who are completing forms, but looking at every single website event and in real time optimizing the campaign for every website event. So who is looking at, clicking on it on a second page, who is looking at all of the different internal pages, and where did that user come from, where did that event come from, what time of day, what type of website, what type of device, and in real time, optimizing the campaign, optimizing the ads for those events. And instead of looking at it later and then trying to optimize the campaign after the fact, just doing it in real time and just really opening up, okay, how can we utilize these algorithms and this machine learning at a larger scale? And then we also have different tools to really identify target audiences, specifically when it comes to mobile tracking, being able to identify, okay, where is your audience coming from based on cell phone data? Where are they going? Where have they been? What are they shopping for? This is all data that we can look at to better identify audiences. So it's really cool to be able to really see from a deeper level and get more engagement in the ad campaigns and more response in the ad campaigns.
Great, thank you for that. I know we've started to do a lot of generative content as well, but we're just trying to scratch the surface on that personalization. Which is really, really intuitive to kind of figure out what is the next content that user wants to see based on, whether they've clicked on your website or downloaded case studies or downloaded white papers. Then instead of just giving everybody the same newsletter, really differentiating and personalizing it. So also from a technology perspective, we have Iverson Bell, who's the program manager at Cubic. Iverson, how are you guys using AI at Cubic?
Great. Well, I've had an opportunity to lead some data engineering initiatives at Cubic Mission Performance Solutions that mostly serve defense customers. Personally, I've, when I was in my doctoral program, I had an opportunity to work on some supervised machine learning models to predict performance for spacecraft propulsion systems. That's ancient history if you're ever having trouble sleeping, and I'm happy to send you my dissertation. That'll help a lot. And but what we're doing at Cubic now, it really goes way beyond what we did in my dissertation. We're just solving tough problems, and sometimes those tough problems, using the right tool for the job. Sometimes that right tool involves AI. So I'll give some examples. We have GridSmart software. And GridSmart uses computer vision and deep neural networks to detect, identify, and track moving objects in a scene. That's really useful because if you put this technology in an intersection, you can extend clearance times. I don't know if you've ever had an issue where you're just trying to rush across an intersection. This can extend those clearance times to make it safer for pedestrians. This can also shorten those clearance times and give time back to vehicles, making intersections more efficient. We also have Tidal Wave, which uses machine learning to provide optimal routing for connected vehicles through urban areas. So we have that technology. We also have, on the more defense side of the house, we enable AI. And so, a lot of our customers have their own artificial intelligence capabilities. We really want to enable those capabilities by managing how they work with their data. So they have a lot of data. We're mostly talking about video data, imagery, and map data. And if you deal with that type of data, you probably understand video data can be very big, right? We have more video data that exists online than people can watch, right? So even if you watch at an accelerated pace, we just generate tons and tons of video data. Map data is, it's a lot of data as well. And so simply managing that data, finding the data you need, so you can eventually process it and use it with machine learning, that's actually the problem. The data management and data preparation are the main challenges. So we have some capabilities to help our customer community so they can then use their AI capabilities more effectively. So in data preparation itself, for folks who have experience with AI, that's actually a big job. Some folks say that's actually much more of AI than the actual model development, is the data preparation, data curation. So we have a tool called JET, which applies computer vision filters to take video that has a lot of quality issues. Maybe there's jitter, maybe there's problems with the light, maybe there's haze or fog, and it can remove those elements to make the video much more clear. So kind of, in short, if you have video, imagery, map data that's not very useful, it's very hard to find, we take that data and make it much more useful, much easier to find, much more valuable for users, or again for machines if they want to use it for AI applications. So that's a lot of what we do. So yeah, that's looking at computer vision, that's looking at route optimization, that's looking at object detection and tracking, just a lot of different things. That's a lot of what we do.
Thank you, Iverson. All right, so this next question is going to be for any of you guys to jump in. I'm going to do a little setup here. So we've been talking about how in each of your roles you work with AI, kind of that cobotic sort of situation where you're working alongside, co-counsel or co-programming or co-marketing. But I'm really curious where AI might replace humans. And Jason had mentioned singularity. I do believe that there is this convergence of man and machine. If you've read any of Ray Kurzweil, he talks about it being 2052, that man and machine are really going to be one. At the same time, I was recently in the Bahamas, and they're not using technology there. They're not focused on efficiency. Efficiency and speed to market and stuff is very much a sense of national pride that we have. But you go elsewhere around the world, and they really focus on maybe humanity a little bit more and less around technical efficiency. But you look at a couple industries. When the internet came out, it replaced the tourism industry. There used to be in every village center the place that you went to go get plane tickets, if you remember, right? We used to have paper maps to figure out how to drive around. Now we have mobile devices. Even when I was in the Bahamas, they all had mobile devices using maps, right? And phone calls used to have a human and a switchboard operator, connecting the one caller with the other caller physically, right? And not only did they get rid of the switchboard operator, but now you don't even have landlines in your houses anymore. It's all mobile devices. So there are things that definitively get replaced with technological innovation. So I'm curious, aside from just working with AI, what jobs do you see getting replaced by AI?
Well, I'll go first.
All right, Jason.
I think any job that requires immense data processing is something that just doesn't need to be done by humans anymore. If you have large amounts of data, and I think you mentioned, Raz, for example, if during discovery someone drops thousands and thousands of documents, that's not a human job. I mean, that's something that we're already at a point that AI robotics can already go through and consume. I think what we're seeing right now is the creative industry that is starting to be challenged, I think, for the first time with AI. If you use tools like DALL-E, the idea that you can use generative AI without needing stock art or photography to suddenly instantly power an entire website full of images just like that. That's something that really makes you think about what's the importance of art when you can create something from art that already exists. This is already also happening in the music industry. Right now, you can go to 3, 4, 5 different sites, and you can just say the taste that you have for a type of music, and just like that, instantly, you have a backdrop for you to drop lyrics on, or whatever it is that you're looking for. These are things that are available right now that are just becoming more prevalent. So I think there are a lot of industries that previously we thought were, because of our minds and our ability to be creative, were just impossible for AI to actually replace. Those are the places that I think that we were not expecting that we're seeing a lot more challenge these days.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I was on a call about AI yesterday, and an architect said that they used to spend weeks and weeks to make renderings of what a building might look like. So they'll put the actual architecture drawings together, and then they'll show some kind of like hero shots of, here's the lobby, here's the outside landscaping. And he says now they just go straight to Midjourney, and they basically type a long prompt. I need a building with 4 floors, roughly this number of feet, with landscaping outside that has tall trees, and they describe the whole thing in text. They hit go, and within 5 minutes they have this beautiful artwork that they then pair with their architecture diagrams. He said they used to spend weeks and weeks to produce these illustrations to really portray it. He goes, now, I have half the staff working on it. They're basically now hire a better use case for those humans. and they're just using Midjourney to do it. But Midjourney or DALL-E, I agree. I think artwork is going to be largely produced independently by AI. The human still gives it the prompts, but it can actually do the production work.
And I know we've riffed on this before, but it's almost like a sci-fi movie where the most important thing is your ability to imagine the prompt that you're asking the computer. Like it's becoming the thing that the more imaginative you can be, the more creative the actual thing that you're generating. Like if you're talking about describing the prompt for getting back an architectural diagram, sometimes it's that little bit of extra flair in your mind that you're adding when you're providing information to a computer that's going to give you something back that's a little different than others. And so the way that we think about just creativity as a whole, I think, is going to start to evolve. And the things that we're looking for when you're interacting with a computer are going to change, that ability to truly embrace cobiotics.
Todd, could I add something to that? I think it's a really interesting point. I think there's something else, though, right? So the other futuristic skill, I think, are the folks who learn to manage, to monitor, to tweak and tailor these systems for their unique use cases. I just read in Harvard Business Review, they're talking about, in general, a lot of AI when it's applied for process automation, for example, and those are a lot of applications where people first thought AI would just transform industries. Process automation, you want to manufacture something or something like that. A lot of the capabilities really aren't that flexible, right? That's really where people shine. We're much more adaptable and flexible. Ultimately, these things are programmed, and sure, they can learn, but there are also questions about the data sets they use to learn from, if those have some inherent problems. Do those data sets, are they truly representative of a changing context? So there are a lot of questions that about how flexible these things are and how much they can be used in our workforces. And so, I think there will be a need for people to kind of real time tailor and change these systems so they more appropriately improve. We were talking about the ROI for your businesses. I think simply monitoring, simply AI, interpretability, understanding these tools that may be, embedded in your business in a really important way, that may be a unique skill set, right? So I think there's some new positions. You can almost think of, the same type of people who, train, dogs, sheep herding dogs or something like that. Like the people who can create these systems, who can manage them, who can monitor them, instead of actually doing that work on their own. I think that'll be a unique job that will grow in its importance over time. So I think there's some new roles that'll exist in the future.
Yeah, so it's almost like an AI administrator. The same way you have a database and a database administrator. Yeah, absolutely.
I would tend to agree with that because when at Enradius, when we first started talking about Jasper, which is the content bot AI, and using that to write blogs and write web content, one of the first things that came to mind was SEO. And I remember working with SEO vendors, and it seemed like any kind of, this is 10 years ago, any kind of SEO vendor, when they had their tools in their toolbox of how to get you at the top of search, it seemed like every time they try to do something, outbound links and so forth, Google would strike down on that, saying, no, you can't do that, you're cheating the system. And the first thing that came to my mind is, how long is it going to take Google to figure out when something's written by a content bot on your website and strike down on it? And when are you going to have to take that content that's written by a bot and go and reword it because something's not quite right, or something's outdated, or something's not quite what you have to tweak? What you can't just copy and paste and put it on your website, right? You're going to have to tweak it and rewrite it for you, because how do you know that it's not a little bit not quite what you need? And so, can AI completely replace anyone who's working on SEO? If you're talking about bots doing, or AI doing content, if AI can start writing your search ads for you, or doing code for you, or something like that, could something like SEO be replaced, or will you always need a human doing that?
I mean, I think it could replace it, because you don't get any points for the process of coming up to the search terms. And the reason I mention this is last week there was an event at Hopkins.
Excuse me.
I ran into Jim Liu, who's one of the professors at Hopkins, and he wrote code using ChatGPT that can recognize if content was written by ChatGPT. Because in academics, the point of academics is not to just come up with the paper, it's to learn as you're writing the paper, is to learn that material. right? So academics, rightfully so, Hopkins policy is that teachers say you can use it or you can't use it. If you do use it, you have to reference how you used AI, generative content, for your paper. But the point is to learn the material, right? But I think SEO, the point is to get better search results. So I don't think we score points by having a human have to do it. I think generative content could produce it, but I think everything needs editorial review by humans.
If I could, so I have a few thoughts there. One is that, the amount of generative content that you all have been reading for years now, I don't think that you've realized, there's a huge chunk of AP News, CNET articles that are all AI written. Almost any article about sports and sports stats these days, it's all AI driven and written. So you're already consuming it and you have no idea that you've been consuming it for years. The second thing is that the reason why Google hasn't yet entered this ChatGPT chat world is because of the fact that they're still trying to protect traditional SEO and search. I'm saying it now, search engines as they exist right now, and SEO and content as a content marketing strategy is not going to be a thing in easily a year or two. If you're trying to generate content to generate SEO results, look at Bang. Bang is going to be a big text area that gives you 1 or 2 results or summarizes results from content. We're already on a revolution of what that's going to look like. So the strategies that we've been using that's all about this generative content, it's not going to be the same. And it's time to start thinking about a different marketing approach. Maybe it means looking at Wikipedia content or the sources that are powering these systems to make sure that that's where you are, because that's going to be the thing that's most important when people ask those direct questions. You asked earlier, Todd, about the jobs that aren't going to exist. I think that there's a big question about what SEO and content marketing looks like going forward. And I imagine it's going to be vastly different in the next 2 to 3 years.
So, can I answer one question that I know it's burning and pressing on everyone's mind? Will AI get rid of the lawyers? And, 2023 be the year when Shakespeare mandate to kill the lawyers come to fulfillment. And at least for this use case, it doesn't look like it. It's at least the AI uses we're seeing, even for legal services, are very rudimentary still. And even though we may have some use cases, I think we use RPA for accounting, for example, and I forgot to mention that. The technology is simply really behind in terms of dealing with the complexity of human behavior and the complexity of our legal system. And even though we had Rocket Lawyer, LegalZoom trying to replace lawyers on very simple tasks, it's pretty apparent that 20 years later, Rocket Lawyer and LegalZoom are pretty deficient if you're looking at any kind of document that requires a modicum of complexity to be addressed. And AI software being created to basically do predictive analysis and all this stuff has a long way to go to deal with the complex issues of empathy involving human behavior, irrationality, and really just making judgment calls in difficult situations. It's really difficult for any kind of tool to read the room, so to speak, and kind of determine in which direction to go, to estimate someone's tolerance for risk. The complexity of these decisions just overwhelms at least the AI that exists now. It could be that we have a different answer in 3 years from now, but that's my thought on this.
Yeah, and speaking about the law angle here, so AI itself, right, and looking at that artwork, it's taking all the information that I can find on the internet, ChatGPT in particular, from 2021. There's a web-based one that'll take the last 2 years too. But both Midjourney and Stable Diffusion both got sued because they were taking copyrighted images, and specifically they were showing images with Getty's watermark in it, right? And so it's pretty obvious for Getty to be like, yeah, I think you're infringing on our copyrights, right? But at what point does it become unenforceable, right? Or something you can't prosecute? An obvious watermark of a copyright image, if it shows up in generative content, that's one thing. But we have, in this country, we've been really strong about copyrights, about patents, about trademarks, right? But there's other parts of the world, in Asia, that they don't. They actually respect copying. That is, you know, the art of bonsai is being able to copy and replicate, right? And it's thousands of generations of copying. At what point does it become unenforceable for copyright issues from a legal perspective, like to the point where it has to be blatant with a watermark, or otherwise we're going to just ignore it? You know, like when people used to copy, you know, music off the radio, right? Copyright infringement, unenforceable, right? Nobody's going to knock on your door and bust in your house and take all your cassette tapes that you copied off the radio, right? So at what point does it, you know, does that line become so blurred that copyright issues become unenforceable?
So I think this is a really interesting question. I don't think I have a perfect answer for it, but it's really, I was part of a discussion regarding the European Union, the Artificial Intelligence Act that they're kind of cooking up there, and in the US we're trying to kind of catch up to speed on that too. And it's kind of analogous to what you mentioned. The idea of what is ethical is kind of shifting in terms of what used to be ethical, in terms of what software can do 10 years ago and what's ethical to do now, given the way people use so ubiquitously software and AI. So there's kind of a shifting landscape. In terms of legal stuff and enforcement, some people say that, and I kind of tend to agree. I don't really want to take a position now because I'm not committed to a position yet. I feel like at this point, US copyright laws are not up to speed to the technology today, specifically the use of AI in terms of capturing content and so forth. The US Copyright Act is like 50 years, maybe someone knows better, but it's been around for a long, long time with very little relevant amendments to this end. And a lot of the law is kind of judge-made, so it's basically what judges and what lawyers can convince judges to say that the law is. It's kind of evolving. And on this background, it's kind of becoming more and more acceptable for people to take other people's content and appropriate it as their own, and kind of putting a fair use mark on it, basically saying, well, it's kind of fair, the way I'm using your content is fair, and they're trying to broaden the fair use kind of exception to copyright protections. And you see these fights happening now all the time. It was, I think, probably the biggest dispute I had about this. It was more of a conference call dispute. It wasn't litigation or anything. It was a vendor that was really gung-ho on convincing one of our clients that the way they were going about scraping data off of websites was legal because all of the data was public, and that was their position. You know, this data is public, and therefore we can take it. And they were waving around this decision that came out in a litigation case. Was, I think, HiQ versus LinkedIn, where this issue wasn't really addressed on point, but people kind of took the position that, well, if it's just scraping something that's public facing, maybe it's fine to do, and became widely accepted in the industry. And there's a whole little cottage industry of web bots and crawlers basically plowing content off websites and providing services to all sorts of organizations. And it took another decision years later in the same HiQ versus LinkedIn case that basically said, look, even if maybe copyright laws aren't entirely clear in terms of what you can use and in what context, and you have to deal with the fair use stuff, you still have to deal with the terms and conditions, which are basically contractual obligations on how you access a website. You have to deal with the contractual obligations that LinkedIn imposes on you when you're crawling or scraping LinkedIn data, no matter how public-facing that data may be, whether it's behind a paywall or an account registration requirement or not. So it's very much a hot topic, an ongoing battle. I think, as you mentioned, it's a cultural issue too, but the cultural sentiment is shifting, and people born, maybe I shouldn't, this may sound offensive to some people, I'm going to stop there on this, but people used to AI, who are born with AI and just scraping data, feel differently than folks who weren't.
No, it's absolutely a hot topic around copyright. Another one is around bias. So, and as a former programmer, and now I actually get to program a little bit more, using some of these generative tools. But as a former programmer, it used to be that the programmers wrote these algorithms and baked in potential bias, right? And so, but when you look at AI is learning from the history of content on the internet. So there was also a lawsuit where somebody had showed that different prompts. They said, draw a picture of a man at work, and they show him in a business suit. They, show him, as an astronaut, right? And then they said, draw a picture of a woman at work, and they showed her more scantily clad. And it wasn't that the programmer had baked in this bias, right? It was that the OpenAI was going to the internet and pulling just all the images it could get of men and of women, and there happened to be the human bias that we baked into the internet in the first place. But there's also a lot of bias around like facial recognition, which is also AI to do that facial recognition. And a lot of the issue is that when you look at all the images on the internet, right, and I'll say it like, myself as a white male, right, with red hair and blue eyes, it's pretty easy to pick me out from other people, right? But we have a very diverse panel here, right? Part of the bias of AI is that it has a harder time differentiating minorities, right, and people of color, right? So how can we, as programmers, and Jason Iverson, as programmers, how can we get rid of some of this bias that's already baked into a lot of our history, a lot of the content that the AI is learning from? How can we combat this?
So I have a few thoughts there. One quick thing just on fair use, though. The thing that's really interesting to me about fair use is the fact that it's the way that we as humans work already. If you think about Iverson, you mentioned your thesis. You probably read a lot. You took all information, you put it into your head, and then you generated something that was original. And how is that different than an AI doing the exact same thing? And so I think when we talk about generating content, the argument is that we're already doing it. We're already copying, because everything that you're doing is based off information that's there. I think that leads into bias, too. The thing that we have to be careful about is that these systems are pulling content from public sources. And when we unleash it, the question is who and what are those sources that are vetted that are powering these engines? It was maybe a decade ago, but there was a point where Microsoft released a chatbot. It was based off a very early AI engine that they developed. And the goal was for this bot to learn by interacting with the humans that it talked with. Within, I think, less than a few hours, the bot was racist, was sexist, was starting to talk about Nazi propaganda. Like, it just exploded that quickly because of what it was ingesting. What we're going to face now is that the bias of these computers, like you were saying, Todd, is based off of all the content that it's pulling in. And now the bias that exists in that content that we use to power these systems are going to ultimately be the things that it spits back out. DuckDuckGo, which is one of the search engines I use, is really big on privacy. They're recently started to introduce a Bing competitor. And their thing is being extremely, extremely thoughtful on the different sources that they use to power their AI engine, because their goal is to make sure that everything's as factually based as possible, to make sure that the AI that they create is not one that's impacted as much by bias. But it's a big issue. And it's something that we, I think all have to wrap our heads around.
Yeah, Iverson, Pam, you guys thoughts there?
I don't know, the first response, just responding to the dissertation comment, we could probably go back and forth on this. I think in general, right, when folks look at generative AI, it depends on how you define original. And one way you may, depending on the prompt, you may get something that does not exist on the internet, but really it's synthesizing information and just kind of mixing it together. It's not novel. It's not novel in the sense, it's not inventing anything. And so I think that's still a goal for artificial intelligence, to start generating unique ideas instead of simply taking what exists and combining that and constructing something. So there is a difference between novelty and simply providing a mirror for what already exists. And frankly, that's as we've been describing, that's part of the issue with bias. So, I mean, there are just so many examples. One that I like that's really interesting is, Amazon spent years working on an artificial intelligence an assistant, like we've been talking about, to support their HR business function, right? They get so many candidates, and so to sift through resumes, recruiters have to look through so many resumes to reduce the burden. They said, hey, you know what? Let's have something to look through these resumes, and once you've down selected, then recruiters will actually look at that smaller pool. And the problem, this was never deployed, right? They shut it off in 2018 during testing. Is they simply get more resumes from males. Tech is dominated by men, unfortunately, and so this had a systematic bias where it discriminated against female candidates. And this is exactly part of the problem, right? So one is actually interesting. There's some Stanford lecture they're talking about. It's like an early lecture. They're introducing you to the concepts of machine learning, and they're kind of talking about like, hey, this is how you do it. You need to have a training set. You need to have a validation set. You need to have a testing set. Blah blah blah. All good. And somebody raises their hand. They say, hey, how do you make sure that there are no issues with the training set influencing how your model performs in production? And the person answers, hey, you know what? That's the problem for the data collectors. It's not my problem. And I think if folks have experience in tech, you'll know that that's my experience. It's very much like, hey, I develop models. My goal is to develop the best model I can. Or, hey, my job is to develop a data set. But there are questions about the diversity of your data set and how much it represents the community, how it will perform in operation. There are questions about, there's a lot of questions about the data itself. There are questions about the model. So I think this really causes folks to take a step back and look at their whole ML ops pipeline. For anybody if you're planning on using a model and tailoring it for your system, for your environment, if you plan on developing something in-house, I think it's really interesting to, do you have an AI ethics, group of folks who sit around and ask these questions at your company? Even if you use something else, you just have to consider the implications, the risks of using something else, because it may be in creating, oftentimes there's a black box problem. We don't know exactly how a lot of these capabilities work, so it's good to at least ask some questions about how this will impact your business, how it'll represent you, especially if it's generative content. And so whether you have an AI ethics committee or not, I think it's good to have some people ask the questions. And I think these questions need to influence how you set up your whole ML ops pipeline, your data ops pipeline, whether it's about the training set, whether it's about how you develop models, whether it's about how you operationalize the data. I think you have to really ask yourself about bias the entire way through. I realize a lot of folks just want to use these tools, and that's great. But because they're so powerful, I do think it's important to ask these questions before you use them and really drive how your business operates. Just my opinion.
No, that's a great point. I mean, when I work with ChatGPT and stuff, at one point it cleaned up like a paper. I've been writing for Forbes, and I majored in math, right, computer science, and so I'm not the best writer, but it cleans up all my articles for me. At one point I said, I love you, and it just shut it down. It's like, sorry, I'm a computer model, we don't do love you, this is inappropriate, right? And but if you ask it any inappropriate questions, it'll just shut you down. That's on the end game. I like what you said, though, that basically your data set is really important, that before you train your AI model, you have to start with really good, unbiased data, and then maybe also shut down some of the inappropriate things. So we talked about copyright, we talked about bias. Iverson, you brought up ethics of this. Pam, I'm curious, as a marketer, right, there's a lot of law around like spam law. Like you can only send people one unsolicited email. If you send more than one, then your domain can get blacklisted, right? And so your emails never go through again. I was talking to somebody yesterday who has an overseas team, and we were talking about how we do business development in person with humans, a lot of relationships. And he said, I don't have a sales team. I just send emails every day. And eventually people will click and they'll be asked. I was like, wow, how many emails do you send? 5,000 emails a day.
Yeah,
they buy lists.
That's a good way for them to get their email shut down.
That is a good way to get emails shut down.
You're not really supposed to send more than 100 a day.
Absolutely, but somehow, I don't know, somehow they're doing it, and it becomes maybe unenforceable. But when you start talking about like sending information to people, and Jason had mentioned that you're all reading content produced by AI, But when you see a newsletter, a lot of times you think, well, this is the company newsletter, went out to hundreds of people. But now you can personalize that newsletter so much that when you receive it from a business, every word might have been handpicked for just you, because now they're personalized. So now from like an ethics perspective, do you see any lines that are being drawn anywhere in terms of like how much we personalize content, how much we cater to the end user, and they maybe being, aware or not aware,
I think as long as I think users just want you to be transparent about it. There's a fine line between, just being transparent and being creepy. So I did a lot of research on this, and users, when it comes to, their privacy, they just really want you to ask permission first before you go and track them. They don't mind you tracking them, and they don't mind personalization. Just ask first. And especially when it comes to email, you're not really supposed to email people newsletters unless you opt in. And now there's different tools out there, like the LinkedIn tools and, email, where you can find email addresses through different platforms that you can just send these emails out without people opting in. And you're not really supposed to do it, but people are doing it anyway. If you're doing that and then personalizing it on top of that, people aren't going to like that. So now you're seeing more and more websites that have, the cookie permissions. That's what people want to see. They want to. They really want to see, like, yes, it's okay if you track me for marketing purposes. Just ask me first and don't sell my data. What they don't want is to stumble upon a website that they didn't mean to go to, and then all of a sudden that website that they don't trust and don't know is tracking them, and they don't know what they're doing with that information. Facebook, they don't mind that they're tracking them. Most people have about 20 different ad categories that they've chosen to be tracked by as far as their ad preferences. They just want to know, essentially.
That's a great point. So they're okay getting highly personalized content as long as they opted in to the data you need to personalize that content.
Correct. Yeah.
I think that's great. And from a legal perspective, right? We have, if it's healthcare data, we have HIPAA laws, right? And how you have to treat that data. If it's kids, we have, I think it's FERPA laws, or kids under 13. There's laws there that parents have to essentially opt in on behalf of their kids. I think there's probably some laws that will come up around, use of personal information for marketing.
Right, and going back to the bias question, because that was difficult for me to answer because it's not something I really thought about. And in some ways I'm thinking, okay, are these advanced data-driven tactics that I'm using, are they actually helping with bias? Because with the old way of targeting, which was just like demographic targeting or behavioral targeting, we're kind of playing a guessing game. So if I have a client telling me they want to target by income, the old way of doing it was, okay, you're going to be targeting zip codes that over-index in a certain income range. Like like let's say they want to target by low income, these are all the zip codes around the Baltimore area that over-index in low income. But Baltimore has a very mixed income within zip codes. So for example, you look at the zip code 21224, which covers both Canton and Dundalk, there's a big mix of income in that one zip code. But when you go to a more advanced targeting, such as addressable geofencing, you can really narrow in. When you're targeting by race, you're not targeting by individuals on the individual level. What you're targeting by with a behavioral targeting by race, you're targeting by people who they think might be African American based on what they're doing online because it falls within what they think are African American interests. So it's not really, it's a guessing game, right? So when we're doing more data-driven targeting, we tend to stay away from the behaviors as far as what they're doing online when it's really more about what they're actually doing on your website. But at the same time, it's like, okay, what should we be targeting to? Like when it comes to things like real estate ads, job-seeking ads, is it really ethical to be targeting by income and race when you've got a real estate ad or
No.
or
That would be the history of redlining in Baltimore City.
So
which
those are the things that
bad.
Facebook and Google has been saying absolutely not. You know, if you've got Mr. Real Estate Agent, I know you want that $1 million listing. You are not allowed to target by zip codes that over-index in high income because that is against equal housing opportunity, and that is just not fair to be able to pick and choose who you're going to go after. And so that's some of the bias that we're going against.
Great information. Ross had a point too, I think.
Yeah, so I have a thought about the interesting business model where you personalize a newsletter and you send it out, you email blast it, because I think right now, generally, and without getting into the details, I think pretty much every jurisdiction outside of the U.S., including the U.S., they have this concept of transparency that is required, and that falls under the unfair and deceptive acts and practices. There are federal laws and state laws around this. So I would think that before engaging in that kind of practice, you would want to make sure that you're transparent about what you're doing with people's data and the fact that you've used personal information to basically profile individuals. And then aside to this kind of general overarching federal state law kind of minefield, there are very powerful privacy and data protection laws around the world now that have kind of come across the ocean over here to the US, and I'm referring here to the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, which is essentially a regulation that's a continuation of a law that's been on the books since the 1990s, but part of the impetus for these laws was to protect consumers, individuals, against the monitoring of their behavior, in other words, profiling. And then the second one would be automated decision making based on these profiles. And there are profiling and automated decision making is permitted, but there are pretty difficult loops you have to jump through in order to do it. Beside notification, you may be, depending on the categories of data you're collecting and processing, you may need to actually obtain the consent of the individual before you even engage in that kind of profiling and so forth. And those difficult requirements have been exported around the world. There are dozens of jurisdictions that have these really strict requirements, including state-level data protection laws in the US. So my guess would be a business model that relies on profiling individuals, using that personal data for marketing purposes, would probably not be sustainable without some significant compliance steps in place in order for that to work.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A couple points there. So as a web developer, we make websites. We have to adhere to GDPR now, because if anybody in the EU is going to open up our website, we got to make sure that we don't just cookie them without their permissions, right? So there is a lot of implications. We're working with a company now that pulls all the publicly available data to do profiling on individuals. It's part of the Intel community, it's software for that community, so it makes a lot of sense. And they even go to the dark web and they pull a lot of personal information that's on the dark web, which at that point it has become public data. But our team, which has some pretty high moral standards, actually in the kickoff meeting said, like, how can you make sure that that person didn't want their data to be private, it got leaked, and now you're using leaked data? And they said the attorneys. The attorneys have to go through, and back to Iverson's point, they review all of that data, and they have to make sure that that data wasn't meant to be private, but it got leaked as public, and therefore then they're able to use it. So they validate that the data is supposed to be public. And we could talk about security for a while. We have just a minute left here. So last question, and we'll go down the row here. Last question: where do you see generative content 2 years from now? Right. So now we're talking about artwork, we're talking about code, we're talking about marketing content. Where do we think AI is going to take generative content 2 years from now?
So generative content, lots of marketing, lots of information sharing, lots of educational, informative content. And I think the challenge there is going to be, is this quality information or is this disinformation? And it's a whole different subject, but as a side note, I'm involved with some projects in policy and so forth, cybersecurity, and disinformation for political purposes, war purposes, it's kind of a big deal, and generative AI is becoming the #1 threat actor in that area. It's kind of amplifying an immensely huge problem, if I can say that already. On a personal level, I really look forward to virtual reality systems that will generate for me just fantastic music with an absolutely immersive content that generated in kind of live streaming, kind of real time, and that generates just excellent entertainment. I think that's kind of coming. It's happening in video games. It's just going to be a cool world to be in.
Yeah, no, that's some great points. So gaming and the disinformation, right? Our political system used to be smearing the other candidate. Now it's just blatantly pushing out disinformation, but it seems to be working. So there's probably going to be some more laws in place there. Jason, what do you think as far as generative content? Where's it going in the next 2 years?
I think that there are two things going to happen. One, we have a whole lot of lawsuits that we're headed into. So just like the Napster days, I think we have lawsuits that are going to be insane for several years just about where this content is originating from. But in the meantime, I think that generative AI content is going to be just like spell check. Microsoft, Grammarly, all these tools are going to embed it so heavily into the applications that we use. You're going to see it in your Google Sheets, your Google Docs, that for most people, you're going to use it so regularly. I think that within a year or two, it's unlikely that you start an email without having a template that's automatically generated. And that's easily, super quickly happening. I can't imagine most people in the next 2 to 3 years starting a document or opening Photoshop with an empty file. It's just not going to be the case. It's going to be very much like the definition is how things work.
I just had a picture of not only is it helping you write a better email, but it responds for you. But then the other recipient's AI responds for hit, and next thing you know, they're just doing work, and we're like, unbeknownst to us, that the AI is just taking care of our jobs. Pam, where do you see in the next 2 years? Where do you see generative content going?
I mean, I'd like to see it more in ads. I mean, we already have, responsive ads and dynamic retargeting. So maybe just take it one step further and have it go with, and have it be used for, the first contact in ads. So instead of having to upload, because I know with like the dynamic retargeting, it's more based on the database of your e-commerce inventory, which is mainly based on your retargeting, your cart abandonment, and things like that. But if the user hasn't seen your brand yet, instead of having to upload various various creative sets and having to create 10 different 10 different creative sets, having just the AI do it for you, that would be cool.
It'll just start to personalize from the
yeah.
Yeah, no, we're seeing a lot of ads now. Who's the Deadpool actor who runs Cricket Mobile?
Ryan Reynolds.
Ryan Reynolds, yeah. Did you see his commercial where he used ChatGPT to write it? Scary how good it was as far as writing that ad for him. One of the first use cases. Iverson, where do you see it going in 2 years?
So I have to give you a slightly longer answer and answer a question you did not ask.
Okay.
So in generative content, right? I mean, this is just for the folks who, I know everybody has a marketing function, but everybody here is not a marketing company. So I'm speaking for those other folks. So if you're in biomedical engineering, I'm assuming you're looking for, protein folding, whatever. What's the next cure, next treatment for something? I think if, IT ops, I think that's to me low-hanging fruit for almost every company. And I think it start making recommendations. So I think there's some interesting things that can come from AI, but instead of focusing on generative content, just look at AI in general. And the reason I do that is because I'm in an industry where there's a lot of variation in adoption of AI capabilities, and I think that's probably true for a lot of folks or different places in their digital transformation, right? So Department of Defense, right? They, over 10 years ago, they had UAVs. You can look this up on YouTube, it's not classified, right? They had UAVs that could take off and land from naval vessels, which is wild to me. So I like to look at this as it's like Top Gun without Tom Cruise. Just the movie with just planes. So that to me is pretty cool, right? At the same time, there are also a lot of things that are happening on pencil and paper. And so I think what we're going to have is some of the late adopters will, over the next 2 to 5 to 10 years, will start to become, actual honest-to-goodness adopters of these capabilities in ways that are unthinkable for them right now. Again, people who are still using pencil and paper. And so these are people who, they don't know where their data is. It's not tagged. It's not indexed properly. I think they're going to start doing more stuff on mobile. I think that's interesting. I think there'll be more augmented reality overlays on top of, whether it's, on your glasses or something else, using your phone and a camera. I think these are interesting things that are possible as some of the late adopters eventually start to adopt. I think that means they have to trust the capabilities. I think that means they need to operate closer to real time. We all talk about how in the computer vision world, how, object detection capabilities are really good. Not in real time. If you want to operate at like 30 frames per second, it needs to be really fast. If it takes any longer than 30 milliseconds to operate, it's old. You're already adding lag to the system. And so those models for computer vision, for detecting something, it's a cat in your picture, those things are only like 60% accurate. That's their average precision across a bunch of classes. That's not great if you're trying to identify a bad guy, right? So as these capabilities get better, as trust grows, I think adoption for the late adopters will increase, and I think they'll start to use these for cool things, again, whether it's, regardless. And I also think if you're in government contracting, I think some proposals will in part be written by some of this generative content as well.
Let's hope so.
Anyway, that's all I got.
All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. We're over time here. We could talk about this for hours. It's just fascinating.